Okay, so good morning, everyone, and welcome. Oh, what did I do then? Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the S-Spec forum. Today, we're going to be focusing on all things wastewater. From my perspective, a very exciting topic because that's my background. So just some housekeeping as we, just prior to starting. As a result of the conversations that we've had with some of the associations for professional learning, there's the opportunity to gain some points towards your professional learning requirements during the year. And we have the ability for people to get some points from the Geospatial Council of Australia, formerly SSSI, the Surveyors Registration Board of Victoria, and the Land Surveyors Licensing Board of WA. So if you are requesting some information, don't hesitate to let us know. You'll receive an email following the completion of this forum requesting people to notify us if they want to get a certificate of attendance. We'd love to see who you are. Please keep your cameras on if you're comfortable with that. And it also makes for a better experience for the people who are presenting and talking at the time. And also, if you could keep your phone on silent and keep yourself on mute to prevent any background noise coming in. If you're dialing in by phone, please don't put us on hold if you need to answer a call. Just hang up and then dial back in. We'll be here, and we'll make sure that you get back in. There is some live Q&A, and what we mean by that is that as we're going through the different sessions today, if you have any questions, pop it into the chat. Michael and I will be monitoring the chats to see what questions come up so we can address them as soon as we can. There will be some live polling today, which is the norm now for each of our sessions, and Michael is going to launch a couple of polls just to get used to, for you to get used to responding to them. And while he's doing that, I'll introduce the rest of our team. So Michael, aka Kelly Island, will be is supporting us with the polling and other activities. Also have two of our interns online, Joey and Yue. So if you want to put your digital hand up, that'll bring you to the top of the screen, and then people can see who you are. Joey is with us until the end of the year, and she's completing a master's in environmental engineering and pretty keen to learn about how A-SPEC fits into her realm, her discipline. And Yue has just completed a PhD in geography, so also very keen to see how she can apply that, how A-SPEC fits into her discipline as well. So welcome to you both. Johan, you have your hand up? Or is, oh no, sorry.
Not really, sorry.
No, sorry, Johan, that was Joey that had a hand up. I was just looking at the overall screen. So, Michael, you launched those polls, and we've had some responses. So please don't hesitate to complete those polls just to get used to it. So where are you located right now? So, a bit of a lighthearted one. And also, Michael, if you could put up the other polls about knowledge of S-Spec and also the background of the person, whether they're a surveyor, whether they're a consulting engineer, and the like. Okay, great. Thank you. You'll be able to find your polls that'll come up on your screen or in your chat box. So, just complete those. Michael will keep a few of them live as we progress. So, in this session, I'll be covering. I'll be your MC for today. So I've got a few hats on that I'll just be switching in between. But in this session today, we'll be covering the what's so right now about S-Spec and generally about the specifications. Brendan McNamara from Wannon Water will take us through his experiences and around his involvement with both Wannon Water and Warrnambool City Council and what it's like to actually undertake a regional initiative. So he's really well placed to outline that for us. And also for the second, each session we usually have two presenters. The second session I'll be presenting a case study around how A-SPEC was adopted for one of the projects for Central Coast Council, and I'll go into a bit more detail. I've briefly touched on it previously, but this time there'll be more detail to give you a sense of the kind of things that we look at to guide the councils, and in this case, dealing with the water, with the discipline dealing with wastewater and water, of how they adopt A-SPEC. And then the what's next, which will be the follow-up. Okay, so 4th of September has been our date, our go live date for the new versions of the specifications. And by now you would have received a notice that the versions are available online. And during the wrap up, I'll show you how you can access those. Now, what I have on the screen is two versions of S-Spec. Why do we do that? Well, essentially what we look at is assets that are brand new that are created through subdivision developments and are often and are gifted to the authorities, and then assets that are created through capital works projects, which is also part of the DDS version, which is S-Spec DDS version 2.0.6. And then at times we know that organizations undertake backlog data capture, or they undertake other field projects where they require some asset pickup of their existing assets. And so S-Spec existing version 1.0.6 is the document that would be used for that. So I'm going to take you through what the difference is. So in the DDS version, here's a typical table, the electrical cables. And as you can see, the fields are all the columns are there, all the attributes are listed. We've got the code list name. Now, when you look at the existing version, what you'll find is an additional column. And the purpose for that is that we've looked at what is practically possible to be captured when you go out in the field. So there are three categories that we have classified each attribute under. One, is it a core requirement? Is it an optional requirement? Or is it a desired requirement, which is the YR, and more research is required? So it may be that the research that you come up with has identified that there's no further information, in which case that's what the answer is. No further information. If there are default fields, you use the default fields. Both of these versions are available through your login. So as I mentioned before, they're available online. If you have an A-SPEC website login, great, you just use your login to access these documents. If you don't, then please let us know, and I'll also show you how to do that in the wrap-up session. But essentially, fill in the contact form that's on the A-SPEC website, and then requesting access, and Melissa from our office will address that with you, or for you, I should say. Now, to get to this point, there's a whole lot of other work that we've been doing. So really what we're doing is we're future-proofing the specs. And a lot of that comes from looking at what other initiatives are there, national and international, and I'm going to talk a bit about those today. And then looking at the input from the users. So a few of the examples today that I'll be using have come from the authorities that are utilising the specs or the consultants. And so Brendan, you might be familiar with a couple of examples that I'm showing, because thanks to yourself at Wannon Water, it's given us some food for thought about how we do with these assets. There is sample data that we're preparing to make sure that people get a head start with setting up their environments. So the sample data will come out as shapefiles, and in the shapefiles, it'll have the new structure. And as I mentioned, 4th of September is the go live date, or was the go live date for all the new versions. So the impact of that is that any projects or new subdivision developments that are requesting permits on or after the 4th of September, the requirement will be that the data comes back in the new version, the 2023 version. Now, the status of the sample data, as you can see on the screen, we've created a spreadsheet where we've identified where the changes are in terms of, is there a new field or is there a field that's being removed? So Michael from our office has actually done this spreadsheet, and we're happy to distribute this spreadsheet for others who may like it. Just put it in the chat if you want to receive this spreadsheet. We'll know your name. Just put your email address and say spreadsheet, please. Spreadsheet of sample data, please. Now, the sample data we are working on, and we anticipate that it will be completed within the next 2 weeks. And it will reflect, as I mentioned, it will reflect the new changes. Now, there's a lot of work being done in this space with Australian Standard 5488, and essentially we know that some organisations use the Australian Standard 5488 to put a level of certainty about the quality of the data that's in their systems. And I haven't got it displayed on the screen, but there are 4 quality levels, which I'm happy to go into during the wrap-up session if people have a request for that. So just if you want to do that, just put that into the chat, and I can talk a little bit more about that. But both Gabby and I have been on the technical committees for Standards Australia in reviewing AS 5488 to make sure that it's from a spatial perspective that it does make sense. Now, from a visualization perspective, the image that I've got on the screen, you may be familiar where you've been walking down the street and all of a sudden you see these markups that are on the ground. These are essentially a requirement for any road opening in Australia. So the requirement is that the locators who do, or whoever the organisation is it needs to locate the underground services. Will go through a dial before you dig scenario, and then they'll mark it up on the ground. What I've got on the left is the guide to the markings. Now, if you look at it and say, you know, we can't really use those in a GIS environment, that's okay. It's not intended for a GIS environment. It's intended for the markups for on the road, so that when people come out, they'll know that anything that's blue, which is in this part of the diagram, the top left of the diagram, relates to water. The yellow relates to gas, and so on and so on. And that provides the people who can do the road opening with an opportunity to make sure that they don't actually break into existing infrastructure. Now, from an A-SPEC perspective, we've also matched it to see what the alignment is. So from an asset class level, on the left, utility asset type, and the asset subtype and the description has come from the standard itself. And what we've done on the right-hand side is identify which specification it relates to, what the asset class is, and any notes that we need to take into account. So we've done this at the asset class level, and we've also done this at the attribute level. And for those of you that are familiar with D, S, and W, you'll now see that there is a roadmap to comply with, in this particular case, S-Spec, and there are two scenarios. What we're looking at, apologies. What we're looking at is values that are required as part of AS5488, and they're clearly marked. And then if the consultant is using this to provide S-Spec compliant data, then there's a series of other fields that they need to populate to make it compliant with A-SPEC. So this is a really important element to transition from some of the core information captured through 5488 and the core information required as part of S-Spec. And we've got further detail in the spec. And again, if you're in this scenario, don't hesitate to contact us so that we can support you with what you need. Now, bottom line is we want to end up with this kind of data. So what I'm showing on the screen is a set of sample data that we've been distributing for the 2019 version of S-Spec, and so we need to transition from an AS5488 environment to this kind of environment. So essentially, we want to be updating the asset data every opportunity that we get, with irrespective of the kind of activity that happens out in the field. Now, Michael, can you please pop up the next poll to see if people have been asked to use AS5488?
Sure, it should pop up in a second.
Thank you. It's up. Great. So if you'd like to take the time, I'd really like to get everybody to respond to this so that we can get a good cross section of whether it has had an impact or not. So it's very simple, yes or no. So thank you for that. We'll keep that up for just a little bit while we're progressing. Now, there's another initiative that Water Services of Australia is undertaking, and it's through an MOU with BIM for Water in the UK. And it's for the management of asset data using UniClass. Now, UniClass is quite topical at the moment because for Victoria, it's also part of the Victorian Digital Asset Strategy. Now, what this initiative, WICHS initiative, is addressing is that It's a water industry classification, hierarchy, and standardization group. So this group is a task group which is part of BIM for Water, which forms part of the UK BIM Alliance. And so there's quite a bit of work done around standardizing the hierarchy. We've had a look at it to see how A-SPEC fits into it. And look, it's a really good initiative because it provides guidance about standardizing your hierarchy. You know, we've been doing quite a bit of work of late with addressing frameworks for creating asset hierarchies and then establishing hierarchies from those frameworks. And what we've seen is that this particular initiative is not well used that I'm aware of. If you have a different experience, don't hesitate to put it into the chat or to contact us. And the key thing about it is it goes down to the product level. So what we're talking about is it goes down to say that there is, and I'll give you an example in a moment. It goes down to say that there's a pump. If you want to classify the components or subcomponents of that particular pump or the characteristics, then you need to use another system or add it to Uniclass, as I've mentioned, as another product. So where we see A-SPEC fitting into it is it provides a level of granularity to describe those characteristics that are not covered by Uniclass. So we see that A-SPEC is really a complementary component to what the classification hierarchy system provides. Now, what that looks like is that if you're looking at a linear pipe, so it's classified as a facility, and then the red boxes are what you really want to be looking at. So it describes the asset. So it's described as a wastewater collection network, and then under that, it's described as wastewater collection pipeline, and then under that, it's described as a wastewater pressure pipeline system. So that's as far as the Uniclass system goes to. It sometimes describes the material. So what we've done is that we've looked at it from the A-SPEC perspective, and we've also looked at VBIS, which is another information system that's been developed specifically for Victoria, but looking to be more national. So on the left, we have A-SPEC. We then look at Uniclass, the coding in there, and then we've looked at the VBIS examples. And you can see some of them, there's quite a bit of detail there where it refers to table 1, for example, in VBIS. Other times there's no VBIS code. So you can see that there's a level of granularity that is offered by A-SPEC, which isn't offered at times by either of these systems. The other thing is that VBIS does not have a geospatial component. So it's fine for a classification system, but there's no geospatial component. And Uniclass is a little bit like that as well. It doesn't specify point, line, or polygon. It just specifies that here's what we're capturing and here's how we code a pressure pipeline system, as I showed you on the previous table. And as you can see here, the codes come down to, for example, if we look at pipes and fittings, so carbon steel, and there's some features under carbon steel, or copper, and there's some features under copper. So what we've identified is that these classification systems were essentially designed from an engineering perspective and targeted for the commercial software providers and the consultants to make sure that everything was classified and they would have the same kind of classification. So there's a lot of work that we've done on that. If anybody's interested in finding out more, again, just put put something in the chat and we'll follow up with you. This is a really important point that I want to make about codes. The codes are dynamic. For a period of time, about 2 years ago, we were seeing new features popping up on a regular basis, which meant that we had to have codes for them because of the structure of the specs. Now, the specs are designed so that there are particular fields that are free text, like manufacturer, model number, those sorts of things. But there are other fields, as I'm showing you on the screen at the moment with these two tables, that we want to control the entry going in to minimize the amount of time spent on it, also the variations in spelling and abbreviations, etc., etc. Now, we know, and we've deliberately not mapped every possibility under each code table. So to take that into account, we've put in a code called C comment. And the relevance of that is that if you are a data provider or data creator and you're using the code list and you find that there's a feature under the control type that is not covered in there, then you use the C comment entry and it becomes a valid entry. And to supplement that, you put the new control type into the comments field. Now, the importance of that is that it twofold. One is from a data validation perspective, the companies that are doing data validation look out for valid entries linked to code tables. If there isn't a value in there, but they see C comment, then it passes. The next check is if someone has put in C comment, have they put in a value in the comments field? If there's no value, then it's a fail. It'll go back for that to be populated. If there is a value in there, then it passes. It doesn't check the value per se. It then comes back to the asset owner to have a look at whether that's a relevant value or not. And that undertakes another series of verification checks. So it's important to do that. And I'm going to talk a bit more about this under data governance in my session a bit later on. Anyone have any questions at the moment? If you do, don't hesitate to pop your hand up or put something in the chat. Request for a new code. So there's no issue. It's not just about GISA controlling the codes. So we put in so what I want to describe is the process of how a new code would be created. So GISA's position is that we have a library of codes. These are interchangeable with a few exceptions around the source, depending on whether it's an existing asset or a new asset. And then you can use the API for codes or the spreadsheet. So the first thing you do is search for the code. And if you're using the spreadsheet, let's just look at that particular scenario, glass reinforced plastic. So we're looking, so in the code list, under the code, we're just searching for glass. We can see what all the options are. And then from that, we can see which code list the option is at. So if it's an existing code, it's not about requesting access to that code. It's more about notifying us that you're going to be using a new code so we can then add it to a code list. So here's another example for requesting a new code. So the internal dialogue was, our pipeline indicates the use of divide valve. Are these common? The response is as it appears on the screen. And the outcome was the use of an existing diverter valve purpose. So diverter is the code, the valve purpose is the code list. And and how that came about was that was also communicated to GISA. So we were part of the conversation to come up with how we end up with whether it's a new code or it's the use of an existing code. And that way it creates some robustness to how relevant the specs are as well. Now, while we're talking about code lists, this is ongoing for us. We know that sometimes we muck up, and in our endeavors to get everything to be appropriate, we have some descriptions that just don't vaguely resemble what the code is. So this is a continuous process for us. So each time that we do an update of the specifications, we go through these quite thoroughly, but also as we're adding new features to the code list, we're looking at that as well. So what you will see from time to time is a notification to say there's a new code list available, and it'll be available through the API where it'll be updated, or there'll be a new spreadsheet, and that way you can access it. So we won't change a document. We won't change the S-Spec document if we change a code. We won't change the S-Spec document to a newer version if there's a new code list. But you will be notified of that via our database mailouts. I'll talk more about this under our governance section, but you may remember that we presented this at previous forums. So I just want to take you through a bit of a snapshot. So which assets do I capture data for? And so the starting point is that we have a checklist. And as you can see on the screen, our strong recommendation is that the checklist is used. And I'm going to go through that in far more detail in the case study that I present. And the case study is for Central Coast Council, as I mentioned, of how the checklist was utilised and then provided to industry. So if you haven't had access to the checklist, then that is also available on the website. You don't need a login to do that. There are some documents that are available without login, so don't hesitate to look at that. Just by maybe just by show of digital hands, just place your digital hand if you have actually used this checklist before. Okay, got it. Now here's another interesting scenario. So how do we map multiple fittings that are attached to each other? So one of the real world scenarios is that what appears in the real world needs to be also applied in the digital world. And so these kind of examples provide some rigor into how the specs are applied. So in this particular scenario, typically, as we've indicated on the screen, the fitting would be attached to the segment of pipe either side of the T. And so what we've got is, if we've got multiple flanges on the one pipe, then those multiple flanges would be linked to that particular pipe, because we know that there might be very short segments or no segments of pipe in between the flanges. So essentially it's about linking it to a particular pipe so you know its location. And there may be more detail that you want, and a lot of that may be answered through a photograph such as this. And then again, we have challenges of new configuration, and this is one of the examples that Brendan sent through to me. I don't think we've classified this one yet, have we, Brendan? Yeah, so I think really it's a triple Y joint. You know, for very simple terms, what we'll do is I'll confirm that with you offline, Brendan, so that we make sure that this forms part of a code list. And wherever possible, if you have a query about a new feature, just remember to send us through a photograph, because that really puts into perspective what we have. Conditional fields. These are becoming more popular. Essentially, it's an if statement. So if this situation exists, then do this. So for example, for the street name, as we've said, if not in the street, enter the location in the location field and then use the default. And similarly for the location, if it's in a street, then the condition for that is you provide the default for the location field. So these are spread throughout all of the specifications. And it's really critical to understand how to read these requirements, because we don't want to see the default values, for example, added for both street name and location. It is one or the other. If the default values are actually entered for both, then it's essentially a no pass. You are likely to get your submission sent back to you to resolve. I've shown this in the other specs, and this is so we're starting to create a data model to show the relationships. So we're going to be building an entity attribute relationship data model. So what that means is that this one is table to table, but we're also going to be identifying how different attributes are linked between tables. Now, we're doing it for our own benefit to try to visually explain how the specifications are and what the relationships are. If you are, and Michael has another poll for this, so if you would be interested for this, just say yes or no, just so that we get a level of interest of people who would like to get it, and when we do complete the modeling, then we'll send you out a notification through our regular database activity. Michael, just keep that going for a little bit. I can see the responses there. So largely, we can see that 81% have said yes. So that's great. And yeah, so keep responding, everyone. Thank you for doing that. There is an increasing emphasis on governance. So I'm going to cover a few areas in governance. And the first one is around the C comment. How do I record C comment? Now, I previously spoke about it, so I'm just going to recap. So from a data provider perspective, it enables the data provider to submit their tables when features don't currently exist. Remember to also populate the comments field. From the asset owner end, the expectation, I've had some comments come back to me and say, George, we're not going to use C comment as a value. Completely agree. That's not the intention. The intention of the C comment field is to show that there is a feature that hasn't been captured previously as a code in the code lists to then create a new code. So these are for new and emerging features. This position is we don't expect the asset owners to use C comment. In fact, we shouldn't see any C comment. If we did a review of the databases, we shouldn't see any C comments as a value against any fields. So you may recall that we just went through the glass reinforced plastic as a pipe material, for the lookup. So that's one aspect around the data governance. Another aspect is around why is it important? Why are we emphasizing the importance of this checklist? Particularly for larger projects, we're seeing that there's often miscommunication about what's expected by the asset owner from the consultant and what's expected of the consultant by the asset owner. So this came up as a result of a council saying to us, George, how can we confirm that we're going to get the assets that we want? So the intention of this is to use it as part of the asset and asset data handover checklist. So we emphasize asset and asset data. We know every organization has an asset handover checklist. That's no problem. There's different aspects to that. So as you can see on this particular list, there's an asset owner check and a developer consultant check. So essentially, if you're using this as part of the assessment phase, whether for capital works or subdivision development, then one party completes it and the other party checks it and then signs off on it. And this then becomes part of the handover process. I know it's another checklist and it may be considered as another thing to do, but we use this quite extensively with some of the data capture project or the more complex data capture projects we do. And it's interesting to see how the consultant that we're working with hasn't considered other features, particularly if you think about it from a wastewater pumping station site, a compound. There's landscaping there, there's roads there, there's car parking there. They are all assets owned by that asset owner, but may not be recognized formally. So if they're built, it gives you an opportunity to collect the data about those. Similarly, from a council end, there's, the best example I can give is when we're talking about open space. You can have everything in an open space environment, not just landscaping and ovals and playing fields. If you're interested in this document, and what this document is a guide, and this is essentially aimed at the councils and authorities that are on this call. This guide is something that we developed a little while ago, and it's to provide guidance as to how to end up with as constructed data submitted to comply with the A-SPEC requirements. And I want to acknowledge Open Spatial for this, because they created a very similar document for one of their clients, which we then got their permission to utilize it for an A-SPEC handover checklist. So thank you very much, Johan. Thank you for allowing us to do that. Now, so what this document does is
Just a second.
Yes.
We had a poll that I think you might have wanted to run.
Yeah, we'll just do it at the end. Oh, actually, pop it up now, Michael. Now that you've mentioned it. So, and we'll have this poll running during these next few slides. So that's with the checklist, that's fine. But also with this, if you want a copy of this document, then just put your name in the chat box to say consultant's guide, and I'll arrange to email it to you. So essentially, this consultant's guide has a number of sections to it, as you can see in the table of contents. And we take, so it's almost like a step-by-step guide as to what's involved for as constructed data submission, taking into account A-SPEC requirements. And it also includes the checklist in it. Now, this one you can see has some of the boxes marked, and I'll talk about this in my case study. And so what we have here is that this checklist was provided to Central Coast Council, went through the preliminary design phase, identified all the assets, and then this was sent out as part of an attachment to part of the tender documents that went out to the market, so that the consultants knew that they had to deliver the assets and the related asset data. So the poll that's up there at the moment is around the checklist. Have you used the checklist? I asked for a set of digital hands before. If you'd like to respond to this, and if it's no, it's no, that's fine. We're happy for you to just populate that. And I can see that 93% are no. So thank you for everybody that has responded to that, and 6% have said yes. The other aspect of quality assurance, and I haven't raised this before, but I thought it was important to outline this. There is an A-SPEC overview document. In the A-SPEC overview document, we talk about a lot of things, and it's a companion document to all the specifications. Now, one of the sections around acceptance testing is the amount of time for an organization to take before, to respond to a consultant. And this was done deliberately so that the consultants knew that there was time being spent and deadlines applied to the submissions provided. If you're not familiar with this, please become familiar with it. To date, there is the onus is on both parties to make sure that the data conforms to the A-SPEC requirements, but also that there is ample communication if the asset owner is not going to be able to meet within these particular timelines. So we have a catch-all phrase. The A-SPEC consortium members will carry out acceptance testing within the following guidelines or from time to time as otherwise arranged with the consultant. This was requested by an asset owner to take into account that sometimes people aren't going to be available, therefore, they wanted the ability to agree on a time with a consultant. I thought it was a great idea, and it has been in the specs for many years. I just wanted to re-emphasize it, that whilst these days are here, there's also an expectation that there'll be communication. But don't wait. If you're expecting communication, don't wait. Follow it up and see what the status is. Why is this aspect so important? This is about recording variations that have occurred during the construction phase. We know that many organizations do this. We also know that typically a lot of these changes are not recorded for a variety of reasons. So we've now, at the request of some asset owners, we've now included these in every specification. And it's to provide certainty and confidence and remove time and effort to verify what has changed. So this is about things that are outside of tolerance, things that have had to have some kind of agreement put in place with the asset owner, between the consultant and the asset owner. Sometimes you'll know that things have to come back and they have to be redesigned and then resubmitted for approval. Other times changes occur out in the field and it's through a conversation with the relevant person who has the experience and authority to make that decision. That's okay. We don't want to add another level of red tape to it. This is more about, just imagine you get a set of data to validate. You might be in the GIS area, you might be in the asset management area. You get a set of data and all you've got to go by is what's presented to you. Otherwise, you've got to go through the design plan line by line, invert level by invert level to see where the changes are. And typically, I know that's not done because of the amount of time that it's taken. So there's no confirmation that what's been designed has been built or that there are variations to the design. This is to remove that ambiguity. So as a person who is then validating the data, if you get the data and then you get a list to say, oh, here are the changes, and is it reflected in the data? Then you've got certainty that the data is appropriate and relevant. We talk about asset recording principles. This is about the level of accuracy out in the field, not from design to construction. This is purely for asset pickup. So we've provided guidance on the level of precision and accuracy required for each asset type. So this can be found in every specification now. And as you can see, table number 8 specifies horizontal and vertical precision for every asset type. The certification form has been modified as well. What I want, the section that I've cut to show you here is the part about the datum. So you'll see that just below the datum field that it has start date of observation and end date of observation. This is particularly important for the companies that are using the ATRF 2014, which is this Australian Terrestrial Reference Framework, which is basically the dynamic datum. If that is going to be used, then it's important to record the start and end dates because that changes the location of the assets. However, what we know is typically everyone is using GDA 2020. Now, before I get onto the case study, I thought I would have a break now, and you can have a break from my voice. And Brendan, are you ready to do your presentation? Great. So look, thank you for everyone. That's the next part is that I'll take you through will be this case study. But for now, I'd like to introduce Brendan McDonald from Wannon Water. Brendan has been a solid contributor, and I want to acknowledge Brendan because nearly all of the examples that I showed came from Brendan's diligence at Wannon Water. And when he was at Warrnambool City Council prior to that, we also received a lot of feedback from him. So he's one of quite a few people that do that. So thank you, Brendan. And over to you.
Thanks, George. I'm always happy to provide comments back. Means that we get the most out of the standards and the data in a format we want. So happy to always be providing that input. Let me just start the slide. But I can't see my own camera, so I'm not quite sure what you'll see here. Let's try that one. Alrighty then. Yeah, thank you, George and Jissa, for asking me to speak. I've taken a bit of a different approach and made it probably a bit more personal with this presentation to talk about my own transition coming from Warrnambool City Council to Wannon Water and how having standards and common practices has made that much easier. Okay, so just an acknowledgement to country that I'm presenting from the Eastern Mar country in southwest Victoria. Just a bit of the location where we are. Yeah, southwest Victoria, the Wannon area. It does overlap with Warrnambool City Council and 5 other municipalities. If anyone has been sort of following the story so far, Warrnambool City and Wannon implemented the A-SPEC standards and ACDC as a validation tool side by side out to the industry a few years ago now, probably 5 or 7 years. It's been going pretty well, in my opinion, since then. So the standards, slight change. I guess I was started the journey pretty familiar with D-SPEC, O-SPEC and R-SPEC, being drainage, open space and roads from a council perspective, but now S-SPEC and W-SPEC, sewer and water, are the ones that I've had to come to learn. Not a big deal, as I'll explain. So the data is standardized. A lot of the forms that George has already gone through, so that certification form and the metadata around the data capture or the project itself. There's generic terminology, such as the area of works, the source, whether it's from field and survey and the like, and their geographical representation and the use of points, lines, polygons, and examples of how to draw each of those features. So all of that has been consistent between the 2 agencies. You've then got the class-specific terminology, and in the case of sewer, we'll say, you've got downstream invert level, you've got diameters and widths, and those abbreviations as well, they carry throughout the suite of specs. So it's not like you're learning an entire new data standard. We also have the use of ACDC, the validation online portal validation tool with both agencies. Okay, so the other useful tool was just knowing how to read the standards. So George has again already shown some screenshots, but I just wanted to go through if anyone is new to them. I've used S-Spec here, but the same goes for all of them. Knowing how to read the standards, especially the additions and deletions between versions. That is common, you know, the yellow highlight really draws your attention to the changes within the whole manual. You don't have to read the 166 pages to work out what's new in a new version. And likewise, if there's anything removed, the blue highlight with the strike through shows you what's changed. Then in the table, you've got the reference to code lists. So you know that if there's a any sort of descriptor there, that you must then choose that value from a code list at the back of the manual. Don't go and try and put your own free text into those. So that's just an easy thing to identify. And then you've also got your data types and validation rules, the same across S, W, O, R, B, whatever you're using, to tell you what the data type should be, expected values or constraints, and the validation, what we're looking when we check the submissions. Okay, so we've got standardized onboarding. That's the same across both authorities, which requires registration to the A-SPEC online webpage. You know, sign up once, get the access, sign your little waiver that it's IP and you agree to that one-time thing, and then you can use it for as many projects as you want. You then go on the mailing list and you're getting the updates as things change. So access to the standards online, so you remain current. One-off registration to the ACDC portal then to be able to validate your submissions. We provide the induction to the ACDC portal. That was a big push at the start of the project when it was implemented, but we do have new consultants coming along and not knowing what A-SPEC is or what the requirements are for the ACDC portal. So we're happy to provide any training on those newcomers to this method, as well as an induction to the ACDC portal, where to find the DWG drawing templates, what they mean, how the layers work, training, frequently asked questions and tips and tricks with using CAD and those drawing templates. There's also the AutoCAD menu bars provided as well, just to help facilitate drafting a bit quicker. And understanding the attribute validation as well. What are we looking for, as I mentioned, around codes, numbers, what are default values and the like. We have a standardized review process between both agencies. So you drop your submission, ASCON submission as a DWG based on the drawing templates we provide. We then download them from the portal, enter them into our record management system, and start our internal review. So there's a GIS and asset data review and sign off. So we just make sure it's spatially correct. It's got one of those coordinate projections that was just mentioned. So we've gone with migrated to GDA 2020, which I think is now the common one, as already mentioned. From that GIS and asset data review, once we know it's all in the right place and all the fields are complete, which the portal does most of that for us, it's off to the engineers to review that it was built to the design. Again, you know, looking for any variation to the endorsed plans. Issues, errors, and if it's in the clear, the acceptance of the submission is then fed back to the submitter. And just to visualize that, this is that flowchart starting left, going to the right. Consultants draft the drawing, submits it to the ACDC portal. There could be a bit of back and forth there while you're self-validating and getting all the fields attributed correctly. Once it is ready, we request you tick it's ready for our review, and that starts at little clock, the yellow clock. This just prevents multiple submissions coming to us and we don't know which one we're reviewing and which one should be the current one. So that's just a more recent change we've implemented. There could be a bit of back and forth again if it doesn't pass that GIS review or the engineering review. We can feed those issues back. But after all of that, we get the nice clean submission and it goes through all of our internal checks and we'll accept it on the ACDC portal. And our development services team then have that requirement of statement of compliance, or if it's capital works, practical completion, criteria is met. If consultants do have issues and a bit of a roadblock with submitting to the portal or the reviews, we're also more than happy to jump in and help out and show you where it may be going wrong. If it's maybe you've recycled an older drawing template and that's changed from an older validation set, and other little tips and tricks and quirks of using AutoCAD. So don't, if we've got any consultants on the line, don't just bang your head against the wall, give it a few cracks, and then reach out to us and we'll try and point you in the right direction. So some common FAQs with the A-SPEC standards. What I've heard a lot across both agencies, I can't find the appropriate material in the lookup list. Should I show private assets? Is material A the same as material B? For example, mild steel cement lined and CLSC. And the use of negative 9999 NA and C comments, which has also been touched on this morning. C comments is now, I think George mentioned 2 years ago, that was brought in to make the code list a bit more dynamic. But before then, we were using a lot more of the NAs and negative 999s, but we're seeing a lot less of those now. So the comments field is helping us get correct values rather than just ignoring the issue. As review periods come around, we audit all of those C comments and feed those values back to GISA, as the examples provided earlier. Common FAQs with the AC/DC process. People saying, I've lost my layers and blocks. So CAD has a purge function. So if you haven't been using that layer and there's nothing on it, you may lose those empty layers. And then if you go to put a pipe on it, there's no pipe there. So come across that for any asset class, really. The area of works blocks consistently produce a spatial error. So there are a couple of things we can look at to resolve that. Spatial attribute errors such as, say, 3 attribute blocks found, or no attribute block found, or isolated configured block found. And a lot of these are two sides of the same coin, where things may be on different layers or duplicates on the same layer or drawn object. So all those are pretty common across the specs and across the drawing styles. So it's good to know, doesn't really matter what you're drawing. A lot of the errors refer to the same thing. A lot of these errors are also published now in the AC/DC online help documentation. So we've really bulked out the FAQs and got those solutions back out there. Both agencies, sorry, this is going a bit more technical now, but both agencies have similar versioning of the standards. So as George mentioned again, I probably should have asked him what he was talking about this morning, because he's covered a lot of what I'm doing here. But as the standards evolve and change over time, we sometimes need to archive an existing standard or database schema, and we'll stand up a new one, depending on the significance of those changes. So you can see on the right-hand side there, early days, column A, that's what we're capturing for water and sewer. Then version 2 in column B, you can see it's built out a couple of more different asset classes. So instrumentation's new for both water and sewer, tanks and pump stations and the site, all new. So we've archived version 1 and then applied version 2, and similarly for version 3, which is what we're currently on. How that applies to what you're submitting to, when we create the project in the AC/DC portal, we will assign the validation set, what you're validating to, and there will be a bit of a transition period there. So we don't expect you to have began capturing in version 2. Standards change, you now have to start over and capture it in version 3. There are grace periods, and we can, as new projects come along or new developments, we would then start going forward, applying the new standards. So that's the same across both agencies as well. However, there are also some common inconsistencies. So not all assets are captured via A-SPEC. Again, referring back to that checklist at the start of a project, what do you expect to be handed over or received at the end of a project? So at Wannon, we only use A-SPEC for our network assets, so water and sewer reticulation. We don't capture facilities, buildings, treatments. We don't subscribe to O-SPEC, so all those open space assets, reserves and parklands that may go alongside our assets. None of that is submitted via ACDC. Instead, we receive facility type data through PDF plan sets that you'd probably be more familiar with. Many pages, you might have an electrical layout, you might have a floor plan and so forth. We are starting to request those as CAD drawings as well, just to help with the digitisation process. But again, we're not getting that rich data and all the attribution. So that's just something for us to work on in future. Any supporting documentation, such as photos and CCTV that's taken throughout the project, these are all managed and transferred outside of the ACDC portal. But we are looking at moving to the document set to make that a single point of file transfer, so you can upload everything there to do with the project. You don't need to go and allocate or email different pieces of data or requirements to different offices throughout the organisation. Again, across both agencies, post-processing is required to import into our asset management information center system. These include things such as we would apply our own maintenance planning zones, links with the finance system, other system IDs, our location hierarchies, and the like. So we don't expect consultants to have all these values or know how to find them or really have access to them. So that's just something that we have to do in post-processing. And yeah, regardless of which agency you're at, that is a requirement. I don't see it ever being 100% receive it from the portal or the contractor and a direct import. Some other differences, the engineering review method. So when I was at council, we had a lot more CAD licenses. So the engineers would open up that drawing from that record management system I mentioned. They would be able to mark it up, edit that drawing, save the version history in our record system, and feed any issues back. At Wannon, we've got fewer CAD licenses. So our solution around that is to publish that drawing to our corporate GIS, to a workspace that the engineers and development services officers have, and they review it in our GIS environment. And they can mark it up in there or take screenshots or request one of the GIS team sit with them if they do have any CAD questions about the underlying data. So there's, yeah, a couple of different review methods. And as I mentioned, all of these can be reviewed in the future, and some we are looking at reviewing and improving. Other inconsistencies are around the database that we capture and keep the A-SPEC data on. Warrnambool City was SQL database. At Wannon, we've got an Oracle database. So again, it doesn't really matter. The standards are built system agnostic, and you can use many different databases or methods. You could probably use geo packages, shapefiles as well, entirely up to your own purpose. Okay, so what is the value of standardization to yourselves? I guess as a consultant, again, if you're on the call, I'd like to think it's more timely customer service. If you raise issues, hopefully we've seen them before. There's a quicker turnaround and acceptance of submissions. expectations are known. So, you know, what is meant by ASCONs before standards. Sometimes they'll align on a PDF plan. Sometimes they wouldn't have invert levels or materials. So just to know that, you know, this is exactly what we're after when it comes to our network assets. Hopefully it makes it more accurate when quoting jobs rather than being an unknown. And with Wannon and Warrnambool City, hopefully that's also bringing more knowledge to the region and the industry. Value of standardisation to myself, particularly with this change of role, the ease of onboarding new consultants, so more confident and more efficient onboarding, know exactly what we need, what to provide them, any issues with signing up, how you sign up, account management, that sort of thing, just makes it much more smoother. Understanding the codes and abbreviations, that's been mentioned, you know, CONC instead of concrete, or DSIL is downstream invert level. Better able to communicate project requirements rather than saying, do we need this, do we need that, chasing up project managers, knowing what to ask for, that sort of thing. Easier use of project and user admin in the ACDC portal. It's the same across both agencies. Automation of processes. So getting it in the same format, we can start building in automation scripts and mapping codes to our own finance system or asset management system, knowing that concrete will always come in as CONC, whether we call it CONC or conc or co or concrete, doesn't matter. We can map them across. I think that's standard. It's also easier then to learn new software when the principles are the same. So the shift from a SQL database to an Oracle database, I found that quite much easier, knowing what to look for, that the tables were the same, that, you know, it's S-Spec underscore new gravity pipe, for example, and what attributes and columns would be in there. It made that much easier. And then just an overall easier transition between organisations based on everything I've said there. So lots of positives selfishly for myself. I hope for the consultants as well in cost reduction and turnarounds, as well as the industry, if we can all learn from what we're doing, not reinventing the wheel, sharing our learnings and successes, and these forums where we can just share, I've had this issue, how do others resolve it, what's, you know, the consistent messaging to the industry, you know, what if, and some of those photos George showed, you know, surely we're not the only ones encountering these new asset types and classes. It's great to have that network to bounce all these things off. So I whizzed through that, but that's my presentation. Happy to take any questions on the role change itself, or the direction, how we're applying standards, S and W, or ACDC. Thank you.
Thanks, Brendan. Look, it was great to give us your personal perspective, because I think sometimes that gets lost in everything that we do, because it comes down to individuals taking on these initiatives. Whilst everyone is thinking about what questions they might ask you, I've got one for you. You mentioned about training consultants and coming on. How did you find your interaction with consultants from going from Warrnambool to Wannon, when they both had sort of the same fundamentals to address, like A-SPEC or ACDC?
Yeah, so are you talking about new consultants coming on?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think at the start of this whole project implementation, we've really covered a lot of our local consultants. So the ones we're bringing on now are probably a bit further afield. So Geelong, Ballarat, Melbourne sort of types. I think they've experienced, standards and having requirements with the city. So they were quite receptive, or they understood that we would have a standard. But I think the extra time, just to show them this is what A-SPEC is, this is how you get access, this is what the consortium is, and you can feed back into it. This is, you have to do it in AutoCAD, and we use the ACDC portal. Here's all your templates. I feel like that was better received rather than just a line in a contract saying you must provide us as cons to our satisfaction. So try and communicate that up front with, what exactly are you looking for, not just a give it a crack, and then we reject and go, no, that's not what we call ASCONs. So I guess, a lot of our local consultants have come along on the journey with us, so they do know how the standards have evolved over time. And I think it all started with D-SPEC for drainage. That's probably the oldest one. So it's been going for some years, and for sewer and now wastewater, I guess we call it. We can't call it W-SPEC, but just to know how things have evolved over time. Some of those newer consultants may not appreciate, I guess. So spending a bit of extra time with them, getting them up to speed, I think they're valued, as well as putting a face to. So these are done virtually as well. So with Teams really helps. We can share screens, get them to share their own CAD environment, and help navigate that way. It just helps, put that personal touch on helping them.
Okay, great. Yep, thanks. Michael, did you have, saw your hand up before?
Oh, no, I'm okay, George. There was actually a question for you, but that I'll raise later.
Okay, no problem. Okay, does anyone have any questions they want to ask of Brendan, particularly, we have some new kids on the block with some attendees from Greater Western Water, so welcome to you all. They're just embarking on this journey. Any tricks and traps for new players, Brendan?
Don't underestimate the worth of just communicating and bringing people along slowly, and selling it as it's a benefit to the consultants and the industry. Yes, it is a change. There may be some upskilling required, but in the long run, it does make things much smoother, especially for those, I guess, real hardline engineers. It is a bit of a change of mindset. So questions around, why is the road centre line not the crest of the road, and things like that, and all those other drawing and background X-reference things you need to do. Just to communicate that, it's not just for engineers, these drawings. They are for GIS staff. They are for asset managers. They are for our internal GIS and customer relations teams. There's so many different purposes of it, and it is trying to capture all those requirements in one submission. So it may be not what you're used to when doing an engineering drawing. Your cross falls and cross sections and long sections and all of that, that can be recreated out of the data if need be. But this is, the focus is on the data rather than having a nice drawing that can print off.
Yeah, thanks. That's very, very wise words there, Brendan. You and I have spoken about this a few times over your journey through Warrnambool. So and what you mentioned about communication, you're spot on. That's been a common message that's come out of all of our forums through all of our presenters, the importance of communication, and not just talking to people, but also listening to find out what's working or not working for them. addressing it. So
Cool.
yes. So
And get
thanks.
yourself in, to the audience, get Chissa or George involved as well. When we were starting, George would come down and do the forums, and so talk, take the organization away, make it less personal, that it's us, that it is a consortium. We're not just, being cowboys doing our own sort of thing. It is a large group. George can probably sell it a lot more than we could at the time, having not yet, taken that journey. So I'm not sure, George, what your involvement is for new uptake. Same with on the ACDC side of things. So just having that, I guess, I'd like to say independent body. But I mean, we do pay into it so that it's free for our consultants. Just get as many perspectives out there rather than just your own.
Yeah, thanks for that, Brendan. Yes, my involvement is pretty much the same now. Having done it for 20 years, I'll probably get more involved now than I used to. So thank you again. Okay, so on that note, I mentioned before that I'm going to talk about a case study, so I'll just share my screen. So the case study, and thanks, you'll see your next poll, everyone. So please respond to that. It really makes a difference knowing how relevant the presentations and conversations are. So I mentioned the Mardi water treatment plant upgrade project. I've spoken about this at going back to 2021 because it was, at that time, it was quite conceptual and we did some preliminary work. So I want to take you through the work that we did with the council that is going to result in the council receiving A-SPEC data. So last year we received a request from the council to say, we're doing this water treatment plant upgrade, and I did mention Central Coast Council. Central Coast Council has responsibility the same as councils in Victoria and WA, but also has a water directorate. So we're dealing with their water directorate at the moment. So the case study is they were going to embark on probably one of the largest projects that they would be dealing with. And it was really important because we'd been talking to them about S-Spec and W-Spec and the benefits of that. So they said, okay, we want to apply A-SPEC to this. How do we do it? So we started off by having a look at the drawings that were sent. This one, these last two images that I've shown are really great images because it shows some virtual reality or some imagery of which is overlaid by the new design. So I really appreciated having a look at that. And so we got into finding out what needed to be captured. So at the time we had a team of 4 interns working with us. So I was taking them through, how to apply the recording of assets to their discipline. And 3 of the interns had completed masters in civil engineering, and the 4th one had an undergrad in civil engineering and was completing a master's in business and communication. So for them, it was really about extending their knowledge and skill base of, okay, they've been taught all about designing and building stuff, but there's been no conversation around recording and why things are recorded. So we use this as an opportunity to provide them with some industry-specific training and exposure, as well as provide our client with with this kind of work. Now, because we were using the interns, we didn't actually charge the client for this. So it was a bit of a benefit of both sides, you know. So we went through the drawings. We looked at what was existing, what was being proposed, and you know, on the screen I've got our markup of their drawings. So the prep work is really critical. The more time you spend on prep, the greater the chance is that what you're going to get is what you expect to get. I can't emphasize enough the amount of time that you need to spend on prep. You know, it is really, really important. So the client sent through to us diagrams of what they were doing. In this case, you know, there was an existing tank. They were going to refit part of it. And you can see that there are some baffles to be installed in the tank. We didn't have baffles. What's a baffle? So, you know, we had to do our own research. So we put the team onto researching the purpose of the baffles, and, you know, in conversations, we'd have a regular meeting with the client, with the lead project manager for this project, and with our team, and we go through where things were at. They sent us through other diagrams about, you know, their sludge lagoon and riprap. I'd never heard the term riprap before. You know, I always thought it was rocks, but there's a particular phrase that we all learnt. So we tied that in back to the specs about how we could apply it. Lagoon inlet structure head wall. Yep, pretty common. So essentially, you know, the client was sending us through details about what was on site, what was expected to be on site, and how it would be, and asking us how it would be treated in A-SPEC. So they sent us through a spreadsheet, and we went through listing all of the asset types, so the specific asset description, and whether it was new or upgraded. So with that, the client then provided their comments. We then went about populating it from an A-SPEC perspective. And as you can see on that page, except for D-SPEC, we've pretty much got every other asset type covered. Now, D-SPEC is covered as well because there's some drainage infrastructure there. But we went to a great level of detail because the client needed to pass this information on to the market who was going to be tendering for it. So the checklists and this prep work really made a difference. Now, I showed this checklist before. So this is now an extract of the document that went out and to the industry as an attachment for the tender. And as you can see, there's quite a bit of work done on the preliminary side, identifying all of the assets that were part of the preliminary design. The consultants who we're now dealing with are now at the stage of confirming. So they are going to complete the contractor to confirm phase. Oh, I've got the same one. The consultant's guide, which I showed you earlier, was modified to reflect New South Wales terminology. So works as executed data submissions is the equivalent of as constructed data submissions. So we modified that to reflect what the requirements were. And this was, again, part of the document that went out. So you know, as Brendan mentioned before, the importance of having these conversations was really, and providing guidance was really important, because that's what's it's either going to set you up to fail or set you up to succeed with what your objectives are. So we spent quite a bit of time on this. And again, this just shows you how we modified the document. So the document that is available on the website, the consultant's guide, that's not available on the website, but I'll send it out to you. I'll send it out to you in a Word version so that you can modify it for your own benefit. And in Appendix 3, we listed the requirements. So, and again, the relevant specification and what the sections were and the asset class type. Now, what came out of this review was some new assets. So we identified platforms, which is now reflected in W-SPEC, hard stands, which is in A-SPEC, and there's a whole bunch of new codes created, such as the baffles, which was mechanical equipment. So rather than create a table specifically for baffles, we looked at the kind of attributes that were needed and then saw if we could match it up with a particular table. And that was really important because it cut down the amount of work that we needed to do, but also reduced the number of duplicated tables that were created in the specifications. And that's primarily been our philosophy. You know, we don't have you'll notice when you look through the tables, as an asset owner, as asset owners, we see that valves are often split out into their different types and created in their hierarchy, depending on the organization. Whereas we will capture all valves in the one table. Our intention is that all the data in that table provides you with sufficient information so you can split out the assets to match your hierarchy. We don't focus on a hierarchy. There's nothing in these specifications that focus on a hierarchy. So again, when Central Coast Council asked us, you know, what's the hierarchy that you have? We say, well, we don't have a hierarchy. We have a data model, and we want to make sure that the data is going to fit into your hierarchy, into your corporate systems. So the end result is that the consultant knows what they need to do to be able to deliver to this expectation. Now, to give you a sense of the size of the project, it was, I think it was reported a couple of versions ago in Utilities Magazine. So if you want to find the article, just go into Utilities Magazine, and it was awarded. It was an $85 million project. So significant piece of infrastructure. And from an A-SPEC perspective, this is the first of its kind where, you know, to this extent across a water authority that involves so many different asset types. Okay. Project part 2. Okay, this is the teaser because this is what I'm going to present next week. So I'll take you through the background work that resulted in council being able to go to the market with these requirements. So I've shown you how we did the prep, how we worked with the project manager. But what I'll talk about next week is how did we even get to that point of Central Coast Council considering A-SPEC for Mardi treatment plant. So I'll go through some of the phases that we talked about. You know, I've talked a lot about the asset and asset data handover process, you know, through checklists. What I'll do next week is I'll talk to you more about the conversations that we had with the internal parties, the different stakeholders, and the kind of workflows that were created to show the impact of A-SPEC on the different business units. So that's for next week. Right. Yeah, let me just So where, so I mentioned this each forum. We've formed a partnership, joint venture partnership with an organisation called Whereabouts Consulting, and we formed a business called Digital Hive. So the intention of Digital Hive is to provide level of technical capability support GIS's clients. And the principal, Gabby Van Veek, is the lead in this area. Normally he would be in this forum. However, he's sunning himself on the Amalfi Coast, I think, somewhere in Italy. So, you know, we'll send him our regards a bit later. So there won't be a tech session that we normally have. So from there, I'll just pause for a moment. Does anybody have any questions about anything that has been spoken about so far? Whether it's Brendan's presentation, anything about S-Spec, anything about the Mardi treatment plant. Feel free to pop yourself off mute or put something in the chat. Michael, is your question?
Hi, George.
Yes.
Yeah, this is a question for you and for everyone else, and probably for Brendan. We saw the tolerance report from the consultant to the authority or council from the variations from the ASCON to the plan. Now, I just wondered, I'm wondering how many people have done this and how have they found their experience in implementing that?
So variation from the plan is probably not well. So those tolerances isn't probably well audited. It's more if the asset is entirely missing from from the ASCONs. So yeah, we don't really have a good process of aligning our issue for construction and then our ASCONs on top of each other to audit, you know, how similar they are. We'll just do spot audits of various projects or developments and capture a few pits, nodes, they're still visible on the surface after all the earthworks are done, and overlay that with the submission just to see if it's, you know, in alignment. Our general rule of thumb is, you know, if it's within a spade width that you'd find it digging, we're pretty happy with that. So when you're talking, you know, fractions or millimeters, we're not too strict on that.
Yeah, so things like as well, like as you brought up before, your asset count for your point, you know, you might valves, this and that. There's the count of that and the length of pipes that are used in a project. I find there's a connection there with the capitalisation of these projects as the gifted assets. Whereas
so with the lengths of pipes reported, I guess the whole process introduces a few errors because they're drawn, you know, snapped to the node. You know, pipes generally, you know, stormwater, they would end at the pit and the pit's a void. So we're sort of adding pseudo pipes there. However, we also use the geometric length, not the actual length. So we're looking at a 2D plane and losing the fall. So there's extra pipe added there. So you sort of, you know, 6 of one, half dozen of the other. But in the scheme of things, auditors haven't seen that as an issue. Like when we talk about unit rates and whether it's $120 per meter or $121.50 per meter, you know, unit rates are all averages and estimates.
Yeah, absolutely.
When you come to do capital works, you know, you're going to quote up project by project anyway. So if you're out, you know, millimeters or half a meter,
Have you found that you've been out any large number of meters? So sometimes the experience is that you get your report and you run the lengths from the submission, But overall, there's a consultant developers report that comes that has, like, if they bought a roll of pipe, and how that comes into the business, into finance, and how that relates to your submission, your final approved submission. That sometimes I'm just going to pull some figures out here. There could be an additional 100 metres of pipe that's not in the drawing, but maybe in the
Yep. So we don't see that because we are only capitalising what's in the ground. I guess finance would see that as inventory or, materials. It could be a depot. It could end up anywhere really, that pipe. So yeah, we are only recording as in the drawing and capitalising what's in the ground once we know where it is. So whether, our maintenance or ops teams have a bit of a flag fall there because they've got some free pipe out of it, and that goes to our maintenance, which we may never see or capture. I'm not sure, but yeah, we don't see it as part of the handover.
Yeah, so you have your own teams that do the installations and design installations of all your sewer and water infrastructure.
Yeah. So if we're talking then capital works, they're going to have to buy that whole roll or reel or whatever, however it's sold. That cost is going to hit that project budget. So when we come to capitalise that project, we would apportion that cost over all the assets that were created. We wouldn't bother expensing or journaling bits of costs for assets that never went in the ground unless it was significant. So potentially, in that case, we might be over-capitalising in those examples, and then we'll have an asset with no value sitting at the depot as inventory, I guess.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Brendan.
Thanks, Michael. And for those that don't know, in a previous life, Michael worked at Western Port Water, so I'm sensing that part of that question came from personal experience, Michael.
Yes, George. Yeah, very much a discovery.
Yes,
yeah.
It's a journey.
It's the maturity. It's your journey and the maturity in that space. And we had got to where we were using the GIS and A-SPEC, and we were getting into capitalizations and putting data into AMOS. And for years we tried to, in the GIS team, we tried to look for, someone must know how much pipes and how many valves are being, or hydrants are being put into a development. Then how does that, in the design phase, then how does that look when it's finished? Some years later, this took about 5-6 years, but we ended up finding out there was a document that came from the developer consultant that stated all these things because there was a bond put down and the bond had to be returned. So we did happen to see some very large discrepancies with the developer consultant of the length of pipe that had been put into the ground to what we could calculate through the GIS, and that is taking into account the little bits of pipes that are going to protrude through a wall, whether that's a manhole or a shaft of some description. So we found that assisted us in getting a real live picture of what we had and what was going on. So we were able to pose questions to about these things until we got a satisfactory resolution. So it was just something to look out for. It was just quite surprising that you can work with other teams in the business, but you're not necessarily getting the data you want from them, even though you're asking. So I think things can be revealed over time. And I think the maturity of the journey and getting into these conversations that George was bringing up and that Brendan's bringing up today, really critical in getting to that place.
Thanks, Michael.
Thanks, George.
Appreciate it. And thank you, Brendan, for answering Michael's question. Okay, so we're in the last 10 minutes or so. So release dates we've spoken about 4th of September was the release date for all the new or the updated versions of the specifications. Now, I've mentioned that they're all available online, and I'll show you about that in just a moment. Continuous improvement. Oh, I'll just go back a step. So continuous improvement. I field many questions from both authorities and consultants, and quite often many issues are resolved quite easily when it comes to interpreting the requirements as per the specs. And many times my feedback to consultants is to speak with the authority. It's really important to keep up that communication, and I'll give you a sense of what you can do about that in just a moment. We're also looking at things of Revit, links between the 3D world and the asset management world, and how you can link the two environments. We're doing quite a bit of work in that. And when we have something tangible to show you, we'll present it. Now, I mentioned about accessing the specs. So this is what happens when you log in. But to get to a login, if you haven't got a login, complete this contact form. So this is on our website at the moment. Complete that form requesting access. If you're already recognized in our system, Melissa will create the access for you. If not, then we'll go through a particular process. Now, when you do log in, and I'll just very quickly log in. You'll get to this page. And on this page over here, click here to download the A-SPEC specifications. It'll bring you to a page that lists all the different specifications. Now, if your organization, so whatever subscriptions your organization has, you will be able to access. If you don't have a subscription to B-SPEC and you try to download B-SPEC, then you'll get a message that you don't have access. Now, I mentioned, so there's the current version of B-SPEC. There's the existing assets, which is a mirror version of the DDS version, but with those categories. The introduction and overview accompanying document, that can just be downloaded without a login. The code list can be downloaded without a login. The asset and asset data handover checklist, both in the Word and PDF version, can be downloaded without a login. We're working on the sample data, so as soon as that becomes available, we'll send you out a notification, and then you can go into your login and get access to that material. We're looking at a new specification, not so relevant for S-Spec, other than to say that we're looking at developing an A-SPEC, and the purpose of that is to look at asset classes that don't naturally fit in. Now, we're considering EV charging stations. More than likely, this will end up in A-SPEC under parking, but bulk fuel or combustible liquid containers. We've had a look at this, and there's no natural home for this kind of asset class to fit in. So if you have a treatment plant or a pumping station site that has this kind of feature, we will create this. This will become the first specification that we create, and our current group of interns have started doing the research about what we need to include in that, and that will come out with A-SPEC. We may even run a little poll to see what term you want the new spec to be called, but we You might get the X files from S-Spec. Who knows? Solar farms, we're also looking at that. We don't have an E-Spec at the moment for energy, but some of our asset owners have solar farms, so we're also considering that. We're creating a list of dedicated A-SPEC contacts. This will only be available through a login, and this will go onto the website. The intention of this is that, excuse me, there is a dedicated email address for the group dealing with the A-SPEC data. So if you're looking to inquire directly with the council, rather than go into an info@council email address, this will go directly into the area dealing with the A-SPEC data. So we will be updating that over time. The next forum is W-SPEC next week. We've not yet confirmed our community presentation, but watch this space. And the second part will be of the Mardi water treatment plant project, which I've spoken about. Now, this is our final set of polls just before we say goodbye to everybody. So Michael's going to push up some polls for you to get your ratings on the presentations that we've had today. I'll endeavour not to vote on that one, Michael. I may skew the results. But this isn't about being nice. This is about being, this is about finding out in reality whether these presentations hit the mark or not. If they didn't, that's okay. And if it wasn't particularly good, then that's okay as well. This is all part of our continuous improvement process as well for our presentations. I want to acknowledge everybody for the time that you've taken to come into this session today, and to being here has been a contribution. You may not have said anything, but just by being here, you've actually contributed to the session, to the success of the session today. Brendan, I acknowledge you for the time and effort that you've put into your presentation and into responding to the questions. As always, it's a pleasure to interact with you, and I do plan to come down to Warrnambool at some point. So I'll let you know, and we'll catch up and see how things are going. Essentially, that's pretty much it. We've structured these forums to start and end at a particular time. We want to maintain the integrity of these forums by adhering to those times. So on that note, I say thank you again. I will be on until 12:15. If anybody has any questions or wants to stay around and just have a gas bag, open to that. But otherwise, enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you again.